And when something doesn't make sense that early in the morning, you don't panic, you dismiss it. You tell yourself it's nothing, just a glitch, maybe a delayed message, maybe something you forgot about. And that's exactly what I did. I ignored it. I dropped my phone and I went on with my morning like every other day, not knowing that that single decision was the beginning of something I would not be able to stop, because everything felt normal until I stepped outside and realized the world was too quiet. Not peaceful, not calm, but empty in a way that made the air feel heavy, like something was missing or maybe something was watching. And even then I told myself I was just overthinking, that maybe it was too early, maybe people were still asleep, maybe I just needed to fully wake up. But deep down there was a feeling I couldn't shake, a quiet warning that something wasn't right, something had already started, and I had just walked straight into it without knowing. And the truth is I should have listened to that message. I should have stayed awake, because what I didn't understand then was that it wasn't just a warning, it was a rule. And the moment I broke it, the moment I let myself relax, the moment I blinked and allowed that weight of sleep to pull me back in, everything changed. Because when I opened my eyes again, I was back in my bed, staring at my phone, and the time was still 6:17, and the message was still there, exactly the same, waiting for me like it knew I hadn't learned anything yet. I didn't notice the pattern the first time it happened. That's what made it worse, because if something strange happens once, you can ignore it, you can explain away, you can convince yourself it's nothing, but when it begins to repeat exactly the same way, down to the smallest details, that's when it stops being coincidence and starts becoming something else, something you can't escape from no matter how hard you try to act normal. And for me, it always began at exactly 6:17 in the morning. Not 6:16, not 6:18, always 6:17, like time itself had been forced to stop at that exact second just to make sure I woke up. The first morning, I opened my eyes slowly, still tired, still halfway inside whatever dream I had just left behind, and the room felt normal. Nothing out of place, nothing unusual, just the quiet hum of the ceiling fan and the faint early light pushing through the window. But when I reached for my phone, that was when I saw it, a message already sitting on my screen, no notification sound, no vibration, just there, like it had been waiting for me. Don't go back to sleep. I remember frowning at it, staring for a few seconds longer than necessary, trying to make sense of it, because it didn't come from any save number, no name, no picture, nothing, just those words sitting there like they belonged. And the strange thing is I wasn't scared. Not yet. It felt more annoying than anything else, like someone trying too hard to be mysterious. So I ignored it, dropped my phone, and went on with my morning. That was my first mistake. Everything felt normal until I stepped outside. At first, I didn't understand what was wrong, because the compound looked the same. Nothing had changed physically, the same buildings, the same gate, the same sky above me. But it felt different, and it took me a few seconds to realize why. There were no sounds, no distant voices, no cars, no footsteps, not even birds, just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but feels occupied, like something is there, just not visible. I stood there longer than I should have, listening, waiting for something, anything, but nothing came, and eventually I shook it off, telling myself it was just too early, maybe people were still asleep, maybe I was overthinking, and that was enough to push the feeling aside. But then things started getting slightly off. Not enough to panic, just enough to notice. I passed my neighbor that morning, someone I see almost every day, and when I greeted him, he paused for a second before responding. Not a normal pause, not the kind where someone didn't hear you properly, but the kind where it felt like he was remembering how to respond, like he had to think about it before saying something as simple as good morning. And when he finally did, his voice sounded normal, but his eyes stayed on me a second too long. I told myself it was nothing. I kept walking, but the feeling didn't leave. As the day went on, I started noticing more small things, little details that didn't sit right. A woman laughing loudly on the phone suddenly stopped mid-laugh and just stood there, frozen, like someone had paused her. And then a few seconds later, she continued like nothing happened. The car driving past slowed down, not gradually, but suddenly, like time had skipped, and for a brief moment, everything around me felt like it had lagged, like reality itself had glitched. It only lasted a second, but I felt it. I knew I felt it. By evening, I was already unsettled, but not enough to be afraid, just uncomfortable, like something in the world had shifted slightly out of place, and no one else seemed to notice. And by the time night came, I was exhausted, mentally drained from trying to ignore a feeling that refused to go away. And that was when I made my second mistake. I went to sleep. It felt normal at first, just darkness pulling me in, my thoughts fading, my body relaxing, until everything went quiet, completely quiet, like the kind of silence you don't hear, you feel, and then suddenly, I opened my eyes. I was back in my bed, the same position, the same room, the same faint morning light, and the same feeling sitting in my chest. Slowly, I turned my head toward my phone. 6:17 a.m. My heart skipped. My hand moved before I could think, reaching for it, already knowing what I was about to see, even though I didn't want to believe it. The screen lit up, and there was again. Don't go back to sleep. This time, it didn't feel like a prank anymore. This time, it felt like a warning. And for the first time, I began to wonder, what happens if I don't listen? The second time it happened, I didn't panic immediately, and that's what made it worse, because a part of me was still trying to be reasonable, still trying to find a normal explanation for something that was clearly no longer normal. And I told myself maybe I had dreamed it. Maybe I had woken up earlier and forgotten. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Because that's easier to believe than accepting that your entire day just ended and somehow started again without your permission. But deep down, I knew. I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the time. 6:17. Again, the same light through the window, the same position on my bed, even the same heaviness in my chest, like I had been placed back into a moment that had already passed. And this time I didn't reach for my phone immediately. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, my heart beating slower but heavier, like it already understood something my mind was refusing to accept. Slowly I turned. The phone was exactly where I left it. The screen was already on, and the message had changed. You stayed too long. I felt it this time, not confusion, not irritation, but something colder, something that settled deep in my stomach and refused to move, because that message wasn't random anymore. It was a response, like something I'd been watching, like something new, exactly what I had done the day before. I sat up slowly, my body tense, my eyes scanning the room like I expected something to be there with me. But everything looked the same, nothing out of place, nothing visibly wrong. And yet the air felt different, thicker, like the room itself was aware of me. I picked up the phone, stared at the message again, hoping it would disappear, hoping it would change back, but it didn't. You stayed too long. And that was when I realized something even worse. It wasn't just repeating. It was progressing. I forced myself to go through the day again. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to understand what was happening. I needed to see if everything would play out the same way, if every moment would repeat exactly as it did before, but it didn't. That was the first real crack. Things were slightly different. Small things at first. The cup I left on the table the previous day wasn't in the same position anymore. It had shifted slightly to the edge, like someone had moved it just enough for me to notice, and I stood there staring at it longer than necessary, trying to remember exactly where I had placed it, trying to convince myself I was just misremembering. But I wasn't. I knew I wasn't. As I stepped outside again, the silence was still there, heavy and unnatural, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt occupied, like something was filling the space where normal life should have been. I walked past the same neighbor. This time, I didn't greet him. I just watched. He walked the same path, the same slow steps, but when he got to the point where I had greeted him the day before, he stopped and turned his head toward me, even though I hadn't said anything. My chest tightened. He looked at me like he was expecting something, like there was a version of me that had already spoken, and when I didn't, his face changed slightly, not confusion, not anger, just something off. Then he spoke, but not my name. A different 1.1 I had never heard before. Are you not going to answer today? My heart dropped. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because in that moment, it felt like I'd stepped into someone else's life, like I wasn't where I was supposed to be, like this day wasn't meant for me anymore. I backed away slowly, my breathing uneven, my mind racing, trying to understand how things could be repeating, but still changing, how people could remember things that I hadn't done yet, or maybe things I had already done but couldn't remember anymore. And that thought stayed with me. The rest of the day only got worse. Conversations didn't follow the same path. People said things they hadn't said before. Moments felt out of order, like the sequence of events was shifting slightly every time I moved through it. And more than once, I felt that same pause in reality, that brief freezing of everything around me, like time was struggling to keep itself together. By evening, I wasn't trying to explain it anymore. I was afraid, not of what I could see, but of what I couldn't, because something was changing the day. Something was adjusting it. And whatever it was, it knew I was noticing. That night, I didn't want to sleep. I tried to stay awake. I really did. I sat on my bed, forcing my eyes open, forcing my mind to stay alert, repeating the message in my head like it was a rule I had broken once and wouldn't break again. Don't go back to sleep. But my body betrayed me. Slowly, without warning, my vision blurred, my thoughts faded, and no matter how hard I tried to fight it, sleep pulled me under like something dragging me down into deep water. And the last thing I remember before everything went dark was the feeling that I had just made the same mistake again. I opened my eyes. The room, the light, the silence. My phone, 6:17. My hand was shaking now. I didn't want to look, but I already knew I had to. Slowly, I reached for it. The screen lit up instantly, and the message was waiting. Not new, not different, but worse, because this time, it felt like it was getting closer. By the third morning, I didn't need to check the time and know what it was. I could feel it before I even opened my eyes, that same heavy stillness sitting in my chest, that same unnatural quiet pressing against the walls like the world was waiting for me to acknowledge it. And when I finally turned my head toward my phone, I already knew what I would see, the glowing screen, the same position, the same moment frozen in place. 6:17. The message was still there, but I didn't read it immediately, because something else had my attention. Something small. Something I would have ignored any other day. The mirror. At first, it was nothing obvious, just a feeling like something in the room wasn't aligning properly, like my eyes were slightly out of sync with what they were seeing, and I sat up slowly, my gaze drifting toward it without fully understanding why. And there I was, sitting on my bed, exactly as I should be, nothing strange, nothing wrong. But then I moved, just slightly, and my reflection didn't follow. Not immediately. It was barely noticeable, less than a second, just a delay, the kind you could blame on your eyes or your mind or even the light, but it was enough to make something cold slide down my spine and settle there. I froze. My reflection froze too, perfectly still now. Too still. I swallowed, forcing myself to move again, slower this time, raising my hand just enough to test it, just enough to see if I had imagined it. This time it followed, perfectly. No delay, no mistake, and somehow that felt worse, because now I couldn't prove it. Now it felt like it was choosing when to be wrong. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding and looked away, shaking my head slightly, trying to push the thought out, trying to convince myself I was just tired, just stressed, just overthinking everything that had been happening, because if I accepted that something as simple as a reflection could break the rules, else could. I stood up, avoiding the mirror as much as I could, moving through my room quickly, grabbing my things, trying to act normal, even though nothing felt normal anymore. And for a moment, just a brief moment, I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. Until later. It didn't happen immediately. It waited. That was the worst part. It waited until I wasn't thinking about it anymore. Until I relaxed. Until I forgot. I was washing my face when it happened. The water was cold, grounding, real, something I could feel, something that reminded me I was still here, still awake, still in control. And I leaned over the sink, eyes closed, letting the water run over my face, trying to steady my thoughts, trying to slow everything down. And then I looked up and saw myself. But something was wrong. Not obvious. Not first. Just off. My expression didn't match how I felt. I wasn't smiling, but my reflection was. Not wide, not exaggerated. Just a small, quiet smile, like it knew something I didn't. My heart stopped. I didn't move that I couldn't. Because the moment I did, it would have to react, and I wasn't ready to see how. Slowly, I stepped back. Why reflection didn't. It stayed leaning forward for just a second longer, still smiling, still watching me, before finally straightening up to match my position. That was when the fear became real, not confusion, not doubt, fear, the kind that grips your chest and doesn't let go. I stumbled away from the mirror, my breathing uneven, my mind racing, trying to process what I had just seen, trying to force logic into something that refused to make sense. And every instinct in me told me not to look back, not to check again, not to confirm it. But I did. I had to. Slowly, I turned. The reflection was normal again. Still, silent, watching. For a long moment, nothing happened. And then it spoke. "You're still here." The voice didn't come from the room that IT came from the mirror. From my reflection, my blood ran cold. By the fourth morning, I didn't need anything to tell me that whatever this was had already crossed the line, because it wasn't waiting for me to notice anymore. It wasn't hiding in small delays or quiet reflections. It was beginning to show itself in ways I couldn't ignore even if I tried. And the moment I stepped out of my room, I felt it immediately. Not saw it, not heard it, but felt it. Like the air itself had changed into something alive, something aware, something breathing along with me. But not for me. And at first I thought it was just panic, just my mind reacting to everything that had already happened. But then I placed my hand against the wall and froze, because it wasn't solid the way it should be. It wasn't still. It moved slowly, subtly, like something beneath it was rising and falling, like a chest pulling in air and letting it out again. And I pulled my hand back immediately, my heart pounding, my eyes locked on it, watching as it continued, that slow, unnatural pulse that made no sound but carried weight, like the entire building had turned into something alive without anyone noticing. I stepped away, my breathing uneven, trying to focus on something else, anything else, but the moment I looked up at the sky, that was when the second crack appeared, because the sky wasn't steady. It flickered, not like lightning, not like clouds moving, but like something struggling to stay in place, like a broken screen glitching between versions of itself. One moment bright, the next dull, one moment clear, the next distorted. And it only lasted a second, maybe less, but it was enough. Enough to make me question if what I was seeing was even real anymore, or if I'd already slipped into something I couldn't come back from. And then there was the shadow. I didn't notice it at first, because it wasn't where it should be. It didn't follow me on the ground. It didn't stretch under the sun. It didn't move the way shadows are supposed to move. It stayed hidden, quiet, patient, existing only where I wasn't directly looking. And I only realized it when I passed a window and caught a glimpse of my reflection. Just a quick glance, just enough to see myself walking and something else behind me. I stopped immediately, turned. There was nothing there. Empty space, still air. But when I looked back at the reflection, it was still there, closer this time, not fully shaped, not clear enough to understand, just a darker form where nothing should have been, standing just behind me like it had always been there, like it had been following me long before I noticed. And the worst part wasn't that I could see it. The worst part was that it didn't move when I did. It stood still, watching, waiting, and in that moment, I understood something I wish I didn't. This wasn't just a dream repeating anymore. Something from it had started to leak out, and it found me. By the fifth morning, I stopped trying to understand what was happening, because whatever this was had already gone beyond anything my mind could explain. And the worst part was not the fear anymore. It was the feeling that I had been here before, not just once, not just twice, but many times, like I was walking through pieces of something I had already lived and somehow forgotten. And that feeling followed me the moment I stepped out of my room, heavier than before, pressing against my thoughts, whispering that none of this was new. At first, it was just small things again, things I almost ignored until I saw the wall. The writing wasn't there before. I knew it wasn't. I would have noticed. But now it stretched across the surface in uneven strokes, like it had been written in a hurry or in fear, the letters rough and pressed deep, as if whoever wrote them didn't have time to be careful. And for a moment, I just stood there staring, my chest tightening as I read the words over and over again, trying to convince myself they didn't mean anything. Wake up before it sees you. My throat went dry, because I didn't remember writing it. But something about it felt familiar. Too familiar. I stepped closer slowly, my hand rising almost on its own, tracing the edges of the letters. And that was when the realization hit me. Not all at once, but in pieces, like something breaking through the surface of my thoughts. The way the lines curved, the pressure in the strokes, the way certain letters leaned slightly to the right. It was my handwriting. I pulled my hand back immediately, my heart racing now, my breathing uneven, because if I had written that, Then when, and why couldn't I remember it? And more importantly, what had I seen that made me write something like that? I stumbled away from the wall, trying to clear my head, trying to find something solid, something real, but the moment I turned, my eyes landed on something else that shouldn't have been there. Photographs, scattered across the table. I froze. Slowly, I moved closer, each step heavier than the last, my eyes fixed on the images as if they might disappear if I blinked. But they didn't. They stayed exactly where they were, waiting for me to see them, waiting for me to understand. I picked one up with shaking hands. It was me, standing somewhere I didn't recognize. The angle was wrong, the lighting unnatural, like it had been taken without me knowing, and my expression, it wasn't normal, it wasn't relaxed, it wasn't even neutral, it was tense, alert, like I was aware of something just outside the frame. I dropped it, picked up another, and another, each one the same. Different places, different positions, but always me, and always that same expression, like I was being watched, or worse, like I knew I was. My chest tightened as the thoughts settled in, heavy and suffocating, because these weren't random, they weren't mistakes, they were moments, pieces of time I had lived, but couldn't remember, proof that this had been happening longer than I thought, longer than I could even measure. And then I saw the notebook. It was sitting there quietly, almost hidden among everything else, like it didn't want to be noticed, but now that I had seen it, I couldn't look away, and something inside me already knew what I would find before I even opened it. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Slowly, carefully like it might react, I flipped it open. Pages filled, not blank, not empty, written, all of it, in my handwriting, line after line, page after page, thoughts, warnings, fragments of something that felt desperate, like I'd been trying to tell myself something I kept forgetting, something important, something urgent. And as my eyes moved across the words, my heart sank deeper with every sentence because none of it felt new. It felt remembered. And then I reached the line that made everything stop. It was written darker than the rest, pressed harder into the page like it mattered more, like it was the one thing I wasn't supposed to miss. If you hear your name when you're alone, don't answer. I stared at it, frozen, because at that exact moment, very faintly, from somewhere behind me, I heard it, my name, called softly, like someone who knew me, like something that had been waiting. And suddenly, I understood why I had written it. Because whatever was following me was learning how to speak. By the sixth morning, I stopped questioning whether something was there, because at that point it wasn't a question anymore, it was a presence, something constant, something patient, something that didn't need to show itself fully for me, to feel it everywhere around me. And the worst part was not seeing it, it was knowing that it could see me. I noticed it first in the spaces I couldn't fully look into. Behind doors that were slightly open, in the gap between a curtain and the wall. In the dark corners that didn't seem as empty as they should be. Every time I passed one, there was a feeling, sharp and immediate, like I was being watched from just out of sight, like something was standing there, close enough to reach me if it wanted to, but choosing not to, choosing to wait. And I started avoiding those places. Not because I had seen anything, but because I was afraid of what would happen if I did. Windows became worse, because windows showed reflections. And reflections didn't lie anymore. At least, not the way they used to. I would walk past one and catch a glimpse of myself, just for a second, just enough to confirm I was still there, still real, but sometimes there would be something else, something behind me that wasn't there when I turned around, something that didn't belong to the world I could touch, but existed clearly in the one I could only see. Not a shape, not a face, just a presence, darker than it should be, closer than it should be. And every time I noticed it, it felt closer the next time. That was when I began to understand. It wasn't random. It wasn't following me blindly. It was reacting. At night, it became impossible to ignore, because that was when I could hear it. Not footsteps, not movement, breathing. Slow, heavy, uneven, like something struggling to stay quiet but not quite managing it. At first, I told myself it was mine, that I was just hearing my own breath in the silence, amplified by fear, distorted by everything that had been happening, but then I held my breath. And it didn't stop. It continued, right there, in the room with me, close enough that I could feel it more than hear it, like the air shifting slightly with each inhale Each exhale, something unseen sharing the same space as me without asking. I didn't move. I didn't dare, because in that moment, I understood something that made everything worse. It wasn't hiding because it couldn't be seen. It was hiding because it didn't need to be. It already knew where I was. And the more I noticed it, the more it noticed me. That was the connection. That was a rule I hadn't understood before. Awareness. The more I became aware of it, the clearer it became, the closer it felt, the heavier its presence grew, like my understanding was feeding it, strengthening it, pulling it further into my world with every realization I made. And by then, it was already too late, because I couldn't stop noticing. I couldn't unsee what I had seen. I couldn't unknow what I had learned. And that meant it was closer than it had ever been before. That night, I lay on my bed, eyes wide open, staring into the darkness, listening to that breathing that no longer tried to hide itself, feeling it somewhere near the edge of the room, somewhere just beyond what I could safely look at. And slowly, without making a sound, I turned my head toward the door. It was slightly open, just enough, and in that narrow gap, for the briefest second, something moved. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. Enough for me to know it wasn't imagination anymore. Enough for me to understand that whatever had been watching me all this time was finally ready to be seen. By the seventh morning, something changed, and for the first time since all of this began, it felt like it was over, not gradually, not in pieces, but suddenly like a switch had been flipped and everything that was wrong had been forced back into place. Because when I opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed was the sound, real sound, not that heavy silence I'd grown used to, but life, distant voices, movement, the faint noise of someone calling out from outside. And I stayed there for a moment, not moving, just listening, letting it sink in because it felt different, it felt right. Slowly, I sat up. The room looked normal. Not just the same, but truly normal, like nothing had ever been wrong, like the weight that had been sitting in the air for days had finally lifted, and for the first time, I didn't feel watched. I reached for my phone. My heart hesitated for a second. Then I turned it on. No message, no warning, just a normal screen. And the time, it wasn't 6:17. I exhaled, a long, heavy breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for what felt like forever. And in that moment, I allowed myself to believe it, that whatever had been happening was over, that I had somehow made it out, that I was finally back. I stepped outside, and everything was alive again. People moving, talking, laughing, cars passing, doors opening and closing, the kind of noise that feels ordinary until it disappears and then returns. And I stood there longer than I should have, just watching it all, almost afraid it would vanish if I blinked. But it didn't. It stayed. And slowly, I began to relax. I spoke to people. They responded normally. No pauses. No strange looks. No wrong names. Everything flowed the way it was supposed to. Even the sky looked right again, steady, clear, not flickering, not shifting, just there, exactly the way it should be. And for a moment, just a brief moment, I convinced myself that I had escaped something I didn't fully understand. But then, I started noticing the small things. The things you don't catch immediately. The things that wait. A man standing across from me didn't blink. Not once. I watched him longer than I should have, waiting for it, expecting it, but his eyes stayed open, fixed, unchanging, like he didn't need to blink at all. And when he finally turned away, it wasn't natural. It was too smooth, too controlled, like a movement being copied rather than lived. I told myself I was imagining it. I tried to move on, but then I saw another, and another. People blinking less, or not at all. And suddenly, the world didn't feel as normal as it had just moments before. Then it got worse. I noticed the shadows. At first, it was just a glance, just something at the edge of my vision, but once I saw it clearly, I couldn't ignore it anymore because the shadows weren't right, they didn't match. They stretched in directions that didn't align with the light. They moved slightly out of sync with the people they belonged to, like they were delayed or independent. Like they had a will of their own. My chest tightened again. That same feeling returning. That same quiet warning rising inside me. And that was when I looked at the clock. Not mine. Not the one in my room. Just a random one hanging in the distance. 6:17. I froze. I checked another. Across the street. 6:17. Another. A phone in someone's hand. 6:17. They weren't all synchronized. They weren't supposed to be. But everywhere I looked, Somewhere, a clock always showed 6:17. Like time hadn't actually moved on. Like I hadn't actually left. And that was when it hit me, slowly, heavily, settling into my chest with a weight I couldn't push away no matter how hard I tried. This wasn't escape. This was part of it. And whatever had been watching me before hadn't lost me. It had just changed the way it kept me. By the 8th morning, I stopped looking for answers outside myself because everything I'd seen, every loop, every warning, every presence pointed back to one place I'd been avoiding, and that was my own memory. And deep down beneath the fear and confusion, there was something buried waiting to surface, and it started as a feeling, a familiarity I couldn't explain, like remembering something without the details, and the more I stayed still and stopped running from it, the stronger it became. Pulling pieces together, slowly, painfully, until I saw it not with my eyes, but in my mind a moment, I had lived one. I had forgotten I was in my bed, just like every other time. The room, the same, the silence, the same, the weight in the air, the same, my phone beside me, 6:17, and the message, don't go back to sleep. But this time it was different because I remembered what I did next. I didn't ignore it, I didn't get up, I didn't question. And I looked at it, and I chose to sleep. I remember the heaviness in my body, the way my eyes struggled to stay open, the way my mind told me it didn't matter. It was just words, nothing real, nothing important. And I let that thought win. I let it pull me under. I closed my eyes and I went back to sleep. And that was the moment that changed everything, because I didn't wake up immediately after. There was something else, something I had blocked out completely, something alive pressing against me from all sides, like I was no longer in my room, no longer in my world, but somewhere. Deeper somewhere I wasn't meant to reach, and I remember trying to move, trying to wake up, trying to pull myself out of it. But I couldn't because something was already there with me. It didn't have a shape, not one I could understand, but I felt it close, watching, waiting, and then it moved not toward me, but into me, and that was the part one had forgotten. The part one wasn't supposed to remember the moment it didn't. Just follow the moment. It didn't just watch the moment it entered, and I gasped my eyes, snapping open my body, shaking my breath uneven, because suddenly everything made sense. Every loop, every change, every warning, every presence I felt around me. It wasn't just something outside trying to get in. It was already inside. That was why I could see me. That was why I could follow me. That was why I could change things, and the message was never random. It was never a glitch. It was a warning, not about the dream, but about me, because the truth, I had been avoiding the truth. I could no longer escape, no matter how much I wanted to, was that this wasn't something trapping me inside it. It was something using me, and I wasn't trying to get out. I was the door. By the 9th morning, everything I knew about reality and dreams began to collapse into one another. Streets stretched endlessly, twisting into impossible angles, rooms repeated endlessly like mirrors reflecting themselves over and over, while voices echoed from timelines that shouldn't exist. And I ran because I knew it was hunting me fully. Now, no more shadows, no more delays, no more warnings. It had learned my pace, my thoughts, my fears, and I could feel it everywhere, pressing against the edges of everything I touched, whispering in the spaces between walls and floors and ceilings. And then it spoke clearly, as if the air itself had grown a voice, and the words burned into my mind and chilled my blood. If you wake up, I disappear. So I won't let you. And suddenly the world tilted impossibly, streets folding into themselves, rooms stacking infinitely, voices overlapping, until every step I took became endless, and every door I opened led to another door, and I realized there was nowhere to hide, and every shadow I thought was mine was not mine at all. But it's in every mirror reflected not me, but the thing waiting behind me, learning me, feeding on me, shaping the space around me to trap me further. And I ran knowing that the moment I tried to wake, it would vanish. And yet I could not stop trying to survive the impossible chase between worlds, the dream and reality, fusing into one terrifying, unending corridor, and every heartbeat brought it closer until I could feel its breath on the back of my neck, and it laughed softly in my mind, knowing I could not escape it even if I tried. By the 10th morning, I reached the edge of everything I had lived through, every loop, every reflection, every presence, every shadow pressing closer than ever before. And I understood in a way that I had never understood before, that I had a choice. I could wake up and forget everything, all the fear, the warnings, the endless loops, the chasing shadows, or I could stay and become part of the dream forever, and every instinct in me screamed to run to the wake. World to grab back what little reality I had left, but at that moment, I saw you not clearly, not fully, but there in the corner of my vision, listening, silent, patient, knowing, and my chest tightened, because I realized the truth, the story itself, the words, the loops, the warnings, all of it was the doorway, not just a trap, but a passage, and I understood that if I moved the wrong way or the right way, it would not matter, because you were here watching, because the line between reader and story had blurred, and I could feel your awareness touching mine, as if the act of being noticed was part of the trap, and I hesitated longer than I should have, my mind screaming for escape, but my body rooted in terror. And then finally, I spoke to the empty air, to the presence, to you, even though I knew you might not answer. And I said the words that would seal the moment in the only way I could. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't wake up.